Michele della Valle and the Jewelry of Dreams. In a treasure book full of obvious names, Michele della Valle feels different. He is not a king, not an explorer, not a politician, not the kind of figure most people would recognize on sight. And that is exactly what makes him interesting. Because sometimes the strangest names in a hunt are not there to be famous. They are there to teach you a way of seeing. Michele della Valle comes out of the world of jewels, but not in the stiff museum label sense. His world is brighter than that, stranger than that, more playful, more emotional. His pieces look like they came from a place where color has memory, and gemstones are not just valuables, but characters. That matters. Because when you start looking at Michele della Valle, you are not just looking at a jeweler. You are looking at a person whose entire creative language is built on myth, transformation, glamour, travel, color, and objects that tell stories without words. And that starts to feel very close to the logic of a puzzle. The broad outline of his life is surprisingly cinematic. Christie's says he was born in Rome and began designing costume jewelry at just 16. In 1976, during a trip to Burma, he bought his first gemstone. Friends told him to show it to Roger Varenne, the legendary stone dealer. Varenne then pointed him toward Christie's, where he met Hans Nadelhofer, who was running the jewelry department at the time. From there, the path opened wider. He worked for FA14RST Jewelers in Rome, the local representative for Harry Winston. In 1978, he opened his own workshop in Piazza di Spagna and began traveling regularly to Asia to source more stones. Later, he collaborated with Bulgari on special orders. In 1987, he moved to Geneva and developed the line that bears his own name. That is not the biography of a random footnote. That is the biography of someone who learned how beauty moves through the world. Rome, Burma, Christie's, Geneva, Asia, Bulgari, Harry Winston. Already you can hear the atmosphere around him. Not just luxury, but passage. Not just jewelry, but circulation. Stones changing hands, ideas changing form, taste crossing borders. And maybe that is the first reason he belongs in a treasure conversation. Treasure is never just about objects. It is about movement. Objects move through time, through owners, through meaning. A gemstone in the ground is geology. A gemstone in a story becomes myth. Michele della Valle seems to understand that instinctively. When Sotheby's asked him about inspiration, he said that in the past he had been inspired by great personalities he loved, his myths. He pointed to his book Jewels and Myths, which connects his work to figures like Maria Callas, Queen Elizabeth II, Rudolf Nureyev, Sophia Loren, and his mother. But he also said that now the stones themselves provide the creative spark. That is a beautiful way to think. Not imposing an idea on a material, but letting the material speak first. That is a very different mindset from the one most people bring to a puzzle. Most people begin with the answer they want and then force the clues to fit it. But a better method is often the one Michele suggests. Let the stone speak first. Let the object tell you what it wants to become. Let the material lead. That is one of the reasons his name feels so suggestive in a book like There's Treasure Inside. Not because he gives you a direct solution, but because he models a way of reading. He reminds you that value is not always where tradition says it should be. In the Sotheby's interview, he also said that he no longer looks first at the value of a stone, but at its beauty. He said there are stones that are not considered the highest value in the old hierarchy, yet they still communicate powerful emotions. He loves bold color combinations and does not hesitate to place an emerald beside amethyst if the emotional effect is right. That is a huge clue, even if it is not a clue in the ordinary sense. Because treasure hunters can become trapped by hierarchy. They assume the rarest thing must be the most important. The most expensive thing must be the intended focus. The most famous name must be the key. But Michele della Valle's whole artistic philosophy pushes against that. Beauty over rank. Feeling over pedigree. Surprise over expectation. A strange combination can matter more than a traditional one. And suddenly he starts to feel less like a jeweler in the background and more like a coded lesson hidden in plain sight. Even the public descriptions of his work make this feeling stronger. Christie's described him as one of the most vibrant names in jewelry, with a background in opera and the arts, and emphasized the bold, colorful, and whimsical character of his creations. GIA, in its review of his book, highlighted the way his jewels connect glamour, nature, and whimsy, mentioning pieces inspired by flowers, animals, jellyfish, palettes of color, and even unusual materials mixed into high luxury design. Read that again and think about the pattern. Not rigid formality, not cold perfection, whimsy, nature, glamour, myth, animals, flowers, color, transformation. That is the language of someone who does not merely set stones into metal. That is the language of someone turning objects into tiny theater. And theater matters here too. Christie's notes his background in opera and the arts. That detail might sound small, but it changes the whole mood. Opera is heightened reality. It is not about plain information. It is about emotion made visible. Costume, color, gesture, voice, symbol. A single object on stage can carry an entire feeling. That sounds a lot like the way certain clues function in a treasure book. A name is not always there because the name matters literally. Sometimes it is there because it carries texture, association, symbolic charge. A world. Michele della Valle carries a world. He carries Rome and old glamour. He carries gem markets and ateliers. He carries mythology and celebrity. He carries color choices that make no sense if you are only thinking in terms of resale value, but perfect sense if you are thinking in terms of emotion and image. And that may be why he is so useful to study. If you only look at him as a biographical subject, he is interesting. If you look at him as a design philosophy, he becomes much more interesting. His book title alone is telling: Jewels and Myths. Not jewels and markets. Not jewels and prestige. Not jewels and investment. Jewels and myths. That phrasing sounds almost like a confession of method. It suggests that the jewels are not just adornments. They are story vessels. They are places where imagination, memory, and cultural image get crystallized into physical form. That idea is all over the treasure world. A treasure is rarely just treasure. It becomes a projection screen. People pour meaning into it, history into it, identity into it, fantasy into it. They do not just want the object. They want the myth that surrounds the object. Michele della Valle seems to work right in that overlap, and his pieces reflect it. Christie's records show a world of multi-gem necklaces, feather brooches, flower forms, tiger patterns, cherries, lemons, stars, coral, cultured pearls, colored diamonds, sapphires, tourmalines, emeralds, and savorites. Even on the auction pages, the work does not read like dry inventory. It reads like a cabinet of bright little fables. That is probably the best way to describe him. He is a maker of jeweled fables. And once you think of him that way, his presence in a clue field starts to glow differently. Maybe he is not meant to tell you where to look. Maybe he is meant to tell you how to think about what you are seeing. Do not flatten the clue. Do not read only for literal content. Read for mythology. Read for color. Read for emotional logic. Read for the way an object can gather worlds around itself. Because that is what jewelers like Michele della Valle do. They take fragments from the earth and arrange them until they feel inevitable. Until a stone and a story belong together. And there is also something powerful about the obscurity itself. Most people outside jewelry circles do not know his name. That gives it a different energy from a big, obvious reference. It feels chosen, deliberate. Not a name included for easy recognition, but one included because it carries a very particular atmosphere. That is often where the real work begins. When a clue is too famous, everyone runs toward the same answer. When a clue is obscure, it slows you down. It forces research. It forces humility. It forces you to ask not just who someone was, but what kind of symbolic field they occupy. Michele della Valle occupies a field of beauty, myth, play, and transformation. That is not trivial. In fact, it may be one of the strongest hidden lessons in the entire hunt. Because treasure solving is not only about distance, maps, and coordinates. It is also about sensibility, about noticing when a creator is pointing you toward a style of thought instead of a plain fact. And Michele's style of thought is clear. The material matters. The feeling matters. The combination matters. The myth matters. Not every valuable thing looks important at first glance. Not every clue is trying to be efficient. Sometimes the clue is inviting you to become more imaginative, more observant, and less obedient to ordinary categories. That may be Michele della Valle's real value in the story. Not as an endpoint, not as a simple answer, but as a reminder that some of the most important things in a treasure hunt are not the loudest, not the most obvious, and not the most expensive. Sometimes they are the most beautiful combination you did not expect to work. And sometimes that combination changes the whole way you read the room. Some names in a treasure story are there to be recognized. Others are there to reshape your eye. Michele della Valle may be one of those names.